Hi, I'm Lindsay,
And I'm Matt, and we're the Sherrills.
and we've been married for 11 years. And today we're going to talk about communication. So, over the last 13 years that we have been a couple, we have learned that communication is really key for our relationship. Early on, it was communicating just our independent needs of what we needed as individuals. And then, as we grew our family, we had to change our communication style and how we talked through things with each other because we had other people that we had to care for and such. So communication is something that is important. It changes as life changes. So when our kids were younger, we communicated about what our infants needed. But now that our kids are older, we communicate about all their activities and different things. And so it's really important that you keep those lines of communication open between you and your partner so that no one gets frustrated because everyone is having a chance to be listened to, and we talk through whatever it needs to be talked through so that that communication is a two-way street, and that everyone feels like they're being heard and that you're working together for that common goal.
And as we all know, communication is very key in expressing how we're feeling, what we're thinking, just where we're at in life. But a really important piece to this that often gets overlooked is that we all don't communicate the same way. And because of that, what we have found to be very important in our relationship is not just communicating with our spouse, but also communicating in the way that makes sense for our spouse. There's so many resources out there that talk about the difference between men and women and how they communicate. And even in neuroscience, there's research out there about how there's really different ways that the brain works, especially when it comes to completing tasks or communicating. Now, they've kind of oversimplified it into boy brain and girl brain, but there's the understanding that not all boys have boy brain, not all girls have girl brain. They just named it that way because of the patterns they saw. And there's also a large portion of the population that has what they call hybrid brain, where the brain kind of works in both ways. And so typically with boy brain, what they found is when somebody is focused on a task, the part of the brain that's responsible for that task is glowing really, really bright, and everything else in the brain is kind of dimmed down a little bit. And people with girl brain, they might be focusing on a task, and the part of the brain responsible for that task is growing or glowing brightest, but the other parts of the brain are still also actively glowing, showing that, there might be some multitasking going on, or while you're doing one task, you might be thinking about another. And so understanding that is really important. One video that we often watch in Marriage 101 comes from the book Men Are Like Waffles and Women Are Like Spaghetti. And they kind of break down that boy brain, girl brain into girl brain is kind of like spaghetti in the sense that one noodle kind of touches all the other noodles. There's so many different things going on at once. Whereas people with boy brain, their brain is more like a waffle. It's a series of boxes. They compartmentalize. If they get into a box to try to solve a problem, they give the solution and then they move on to the next box. Or they might enter that box and see there isn't a solution to the problem and then still move on to the next box. But people with girl brain or have more of that multitasking component, that's really difficult for them to do. So what we have found in our relationship is that I am definitely a compartmentalizer. And so if Lindsay wants to communicate something with me, but I'm already intensely focused on one task, I need some time to sort of adjust to the fact that we're going to be talking about something else. And so Lindsay has understood that about me and respects that and has been very gracious and patient with me in those situations. And likewise, there's times where Lindsay might be really frustrated or upset, and there's so many plates spinning in the air. And I very easily can say, well, let's just forget about those things and focus on this. But before, I didn't realize that she can't do that. That's hard for her to do. She can't just forget the other stuff going on. And so I've had to learn how to respect that and to work with her in the fact that she doesn't work well just focusing on one thing at a time all the time, because there's other things going on in our lives as well that are on her mind. Another analogy that I've heard is people with girl brain. It's kind of like having a pop-up blocker that's broken, right? You might be able to minimize the window on the computer to focus on another, but it's still running in the background and it might randomly just pop up on top of the window you're working on. And it can be very difficult to approach things the same way that people with boy brain do. And so understanding how your partner thinks, how your partner communicates best is very, very important to successful communication. The communication itself is very important, but also in the ways you choose to communicate is important. And so I would encourage, if you haven't had these conversations already, I mean, getting down to the basics, the foundation level of how do you work best? We found in our relationship, I work best with a list of tasks because I compartmentalize. If Lindsey has a lot of things that she would like to see get done around the house or just to-do lists, if she gives me that list and says, these just need to be done by a certain day, then I can work on those things on my own time and compartmentalize as I need and get those things done and help around the house and make sure that we're shouldering the load together. But I'm also able to do it in the way that works best for me. And what works best for me doesn't always work best for Lindsey. And so learning that over the years has been very important. So there are tons of resources out there, like I said. A lot of times they kind of break things down by gender, like here's how men think and how women think. But there's the understanding that obviously we all don't fit perfectly into those gender stereotypes. So having those conversations with your spouse or with your partner is very, very important to make sure you understand how your particular partner functions best and communicates best. So as you go through and grow in your relationship and you grow in your communication, knowing that as life changes, maybe those communication methods change as well. So keeping those lines of communication open are very, very important. So I would like to take this time to just close us in a thought of prayer about moving forward in our relationships with communication. Heavenly God, we thank you so much for giving us an example in your Son of patience and love. And we ask that as we continue to grow in our relationships, that we would keep a focus on this communication and be respectful and empathetic for those in our lives to best understand how we can communicate effectively. We ask that your Spirit would continue to work in our hearts and help us grow as we grow in our relationships, and to give us guidance and encouragement as we grow in those relationships. We ask all of this in your loving name. Amen.